It was incredibly heavy, incredibly stressful, incredibly painful. And it was really hard to not be one of the women filing charges. I felt like I was betraying my fellow women, and I recognized the misogyny that was living in me that convinced me not to speak.
Welcome to the first episode of the Recovering Trauma series. I am so thankful for this opportunity to help people share their stories, that we can learn compassion, that we can get empowered to find our own freedom or to help other people to find their freedom through whatever their challenges they're facing in life that have to do with spiritual and physical abuse, dealing with misogyny within the church, dealing with the scars that come from things like purity culture and all of the mess. So I'm really thankful for this conversation. I hope that you will watch it all the way through and let me know what you think and share it with someone that you think would benefit from it. Thank you so much. I do want to give a trigger warning. There are brief mentions of SA, and I want you to be aware of that.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being willing to do this, for sharing your story. And I really believe that it can change the world. And I want to just jump right in. The whole point of this is there were times when you wanted to speak up and you didn't. And that's what we want to talk about today. So do you remember the first time that this ever happened to you, like even as a child?
Yeah, absolutely. As a child, I was taught to be nice, to not disrupt. And my family was kind of a model family in the church, but also a family with a lot of problems that were pretty hidden. And in particular, just a small thing. I remember a Sunday morning, we were on the way to church, and my dad was driving and he got pulled over by the police and got a ticket. And it was like, we're not going to tell anybody at church about this. you know and that was such like a microcosm of, we're not going to tell anybody at church that dad has a massive anger management problem. We're not going to tell anybody at church that sometimes my dad, who's the head of the deacons at church, hits people. And, we don't tell anybody at church all these things. We don't tell anybody. And that my mom appeared to be this wonderful, put together person. In actuality, she was the narcissist, and I was being the caretaker from infancy. So there were always all of these things from childhood that I couldn't speak, and that I learned not to speak. So that was a pattern I learned very young.
So this is what you would call the old trauma that happened, that was in your formative years. Is there anything else that you would want to say into what that old trauma was?
Yeah, I think that purity culture has a lot to do with that old trauma too. I was taught that girls don't masturbate, girls don't have sexual desire. I remember I was in middle school and my mom and I went to a Wendy's restaurant, and we're sitting there, fast food, we're sitting there, and she started telling me about my dad about my brother masturbating and how bad and dirty that was. And so awkward. And I was a kid that was, yeah, exactly. And I was a kid that masturbated. So it was so shaming. And I always had this enormous shame around masturbation, and grew up in a very conservative church where I always felt like I had to ask for forgiveness for my sins and ask God into my heart again every single day. And so I always had this bind around having sexual desire. And it took a long time for me to realize that actually masturbation was a really healthy way of expressing my sexuality and exploring and growing that without dependence on another person and a relationship that might not be very healthy.
Why can't we just teach kids that their bodies are normal and the desires of our bodies are normal?
Right. So these were, again, all things not allowed to be spoken, not allowed to be named. And the shaming was a mechanism for delivering the message of do not speak out, do not name.
Yeah. And that definitely would follow you into your life, especially when it comes to even being an adult, being under people and having that authority over you. So I wanted to jump right into that minister who abused his power.
Yeah, it was such a complex situation in that, I worked in many churches where misogyny was at play. And almost every church I've worked in many, had men that were demanding that women and anybody, it was also very nepotistic in a lot of churches I served, in that they hired from the inside. And so if you weren't somebody that was kind of reared and trained by the right internal people, then your ideas were external and not valued and not wanted and not welcome. And again, should not be spoken. And if you did speak, then you were an outsider.
Or a Jezebel.
Yeah. So I experienced a lot of that, which was pretty silencing. So my expectation of leaders was pretty low. And what I felt like was going to be acceptable to say was pretty minimal. And I was serving in a church that had been a really great experience. When I first started, there was a woman that was the pastor who was really phenomenal, is still a dear beloved friend and is my spiritual director now. And, I just shout from my office to hers, I love you, because she was so great. And she retired. And then a new pastor came in, first as an interim and then stayed long-term. And that was the plan. But then there were some red flags. And there were also some fabulous things. He was phenomenal theologically. He was an incredible preacher. And here's the complexity of human beings. We all are imperfect beings and we make mistakes. And that's what I saw in this person. He was my friend. He was a role model theologically, and he misused his power. So I remember a simple explanation or example was when I was invited to join a building planning committee to discuss remodeling the church building. I checked in because I was invited by somebody else. So I checked in with the pastor, my boss, about that. And he said, well, as long as your vision for the building is the same as mine, then I'm happy to have you on the committee. I love that, like a little alarm on my phone just went, or on my computer went off, because it's like, oh my word, yes. So that was really harmful, and minimizing. And so that was one of those moments that illustrated, but it got, there was a lot more than just that. And there were a lot of instances that a lot of other women experienced that were much more significant than that.
And did you hear about them? Did you just like, no, that couldn't be true?
Oh no, I did hear. And my job was to oversee the Safe Church policy, abuse prevention. So I had to hold all the files on any documentation of abuse that happened. So I read everything. So I knew everything that was said, comments that were sexual.
And you believed them from the beginning?
I believed them from the beginning, yes. But I also, in the beginning, was like, well, he says that this is what he said, and she says that this is what he said. And they're very similar, but they have different meanings, So part of me wanted to, in my family growing up, even though my dad had a anger management problem and would hit, he was the more stable parent because my mom was a narcissist. So I wanted my dad to be good, and I needed him. And he I do believe that all people are good. And I worked hard to transform my theology from an idea of original sin into adopting original blessing and believing that we're all born good. But I also believe that we make mistakes and we need accountability, and we need to agree to grow. And so there's all of this,
that propensity to forgive just blocks like consequences so often.
Yeah. So I'm watching the complexity in my boss, and I'm wanting accountability for him, and I'm wanting growth for him. And I'm struggling to know how to speak, and know that when I don't speak, that's what serves me best, because historically, that's the message I've internalized. So I called him on things that he said occasionally, but I didn't always call him on things that he said. I had a relationship where he would say, as other people were making complaints about him, he would say, I really hope you know that you could tell me. And I sort of knew, but I also knew what would serve me best in my job. And I also knew the messaging that was internalized, that I didn't even fully know, so things progressed. There were a lot of situations, for example, in that building committee, where I would suggest, because my ideas weren't the same as my boss's ideas. And there were a lot of ideas that I would suggest that were ignored. And then if occasionally a man would repeat an idea, and then my boss would think it was great. And apparently this is really a thing, because at some point he got a hearing aid to help him hear women's voices, because apparently there is a pitch to women's voices, and some men literally can't hear women. I don't know that, apparently it's a thing, but that was really harmful. So that happened all the time in human resources meetings. Women would speak and he would not hear. And that happened over and over again. And, there were there were some financial things that were problematic.
Discrepancies?
They were regarding prioritizations and gray areas financially. It was a children's center that I supervised, and the church was basically surviving off of the income of the children's center and not allowing the children's center to save any of its income for if they had a bad year, and promising that they would always take care of the children's center if they ever had a bad year. But when the bad year came, they completely threw the director who I supervised and the whole center under the bus, and did repayment when, it didn't take very many years to add up all of the excess income that the children's center brought in. But the church even would communicate in their monthly statements how much the church brought in, how much the church spent, how much the children's center brought in, and how much the food bank brought in. So the church was really living financially off of the children's center and the food bank, which I thought was pretty gross. I thought the church probably needed to better manage its money so that they could live off their own income and not their ministries. But that what didn't happen. And so then those ministries got thrown under the bus, which was pretty unfair. So, there were a lot of different things like that. And then those scenarios get ugly. It's not just black and white. It gets ugly. It gets personal.
When did it just that's it? I can't take it anymore. You're way more wrong than I can forgive. Let's move on with this process of making you face the consequences.
When 7 women filed formal charges.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. When 7 women filed formal charges, and I couldn't explain away the difference of his explanation versus her explanation, I couldn't push that aside. I couldn't just say, well, he packs the seats in the sanctuary, he keeps money coming in. He's teaching me theologically, which I really value, politically we're aligned, theologically we're aligned, and darn it, I want there to be transformation. I want there to be accountability. I want there to be growth. But at a level above my boss, there was also misogyny and a lack of understanding. So, the district level higher than my boss was also misogynistic and couldn't see it, didn't see the problem. And so there was no way to offer accountability, So I watched 2 friends who were associate pastors come in, and both friends that I invited to come in to the role in the church. And I watched them leave. And the first one, had scheduled an HR meeting to talk about, everything that had happened to her. And the district person who was supervising my boss, the senior pastor, invited my boss to the meeting, which is completely unacceptable. At which point she just walked and said, that's it, I quit. I'm not coming back tomorrow. So at the point of 7 women filing charges, I realized that I had to speak. And, I did interviews with the investigation. And again, I had to hold all of those files. It was incredibly heavy, incredibly stressful, incredibly painful. And it was really hard to not be one of the women filing charges. I felt like I was betraying my fellow women, and I recognized the misogyny that was living in me that convinced me not to speak. That internalized misogyny from my upbringing, from that trauma from my childhood that prevented me from speaking. And it reminded me that a couple of years prior, we had an employee in the church who scared me all the time. Every time I was in a room alone with him, which happened often, I would feel immediately my gut would tell me that I needed to do something. So I would employ humor to try and de-escalate the situation. And eventually he threatened a colleague with a gun. And I had never documented my feelings of being threatened and anxious and my gut rising and telling me that I needed to do something, which was, in my case, to employ humor to try and de-escalate the situation. But I'd never documented the fact that I felt an inappropriate escalation every time I was alone in a room with him.
I forgot to ask, were you present when this gun was pulled?
The gun was never pulled.
Oh.
He threatened her that he would go home and get his gun.
Oh, gosh.
At which point she communicated that. And fortunately, one of my fellow colleagues had documented his inappropriate treatment, which gave a second piece of documentation that made termination immediately much easier. So it speaks to the incredible importance of listening to your gut. So really, it's healing for me to speak and to share this story and to talk now. But I also hope that anyone that might be listening, that might be experiencing places where your gut is telling you that something is not right in a work situation or a relationship, that you would listen to that and that you would document that. And my hope is that others would have the courage to speak out and document when harmful misogyny is being carried out and is hurting people.
Absolutely.
And the goal is not to villainize. The goal is accountability and safety for all. I sort of see myself as a bridge builder and as a translator within work towards equity. And as I grow and learn, I recognize the ways in which I'm growing, in which I am seeing the ways in which I have perpetuated harm in the past. And that is an invitation for transformation and growth within myself. And it's an invitation for transformation and growth within all of us. But it does take naming and recognizing the places in which we have participated or been complicit in harm for us to be able to be willing to grow. And that's where we have the privilege of calling people in towards growth, calling people in to say, this doesn't invalidate you from doing good work in your life. This doesn't make you a bad person. But it does mean that we perpetuate harm in our society. There's a lot of ways that we have normalized and said that behaviors are okay that are not okay.
Men will be men, boys will be boys.
That's right. That's right. And, I had another situation just arise in the last couple of weeks that pointed this out to me again. And my son was dating somebody and broke up. And when he broke up, he came home a couple days later, and a friend of his in his class told him that, oh, by the way, the girl you were dating asked my friend to slash your tires, and I discouraged him from doing so. And as I thought about it, I blamed my son. I was like, oh, you hurt this girl. And my first response was, oh, she's really hurting. And my son said, that's not the way we think about this. And I said, oh, yeah. And I realized I was blaming him because I took the responsibility. I felt blamed. I felt like it was my fault when I was sexually assaulted. I felt like it was my fault when I experienced statutory rape. And because I was sent that message, as a missionary, when I was sexually assaulted by a doctor, the clinic said, we need the doctor, so you're just not going to be able to go to the doctor. You'll just be the one that doesn't have a doctor. Everybody else needs a doctor. So even though he admitted it, like, we're not going to do anything, you just can't go to the doctor. So it's like the message is, it's my fault, and that has been an accepted message in our world. But
The
it's
message to
not.
women is be quiet, keep the
Be
status
quiet.
quo rolling.
That's right. Don't interrupt the incredible swimmer's reputation, was the message to, what was it, that college swimmer who the
Oh gosh,
judge was like, well, I don't want to damage this
Brock.
awesome swimmer. Yeah, or, the Olympic coach, like people are like, well, you don't want to damage his reputation. Like, so you're totally shaming women and hurting them by not allowing them to use their voice.
Your voice matters and you deserve it. Like you were always more important than that doctor. Another doctor could have come. They could have made that happen. Like I wanted to ask a quick question. Do you have any resources for documenting something that's gone wrong? Like if this is just a process that needs to be demystified, it doesn't have to be done here. We can put all the resources down below in the description of this video, but I just want to know if that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of resources available. The thing that I would say today to start with is that it's really simple. It doesn't have to be complex. Just write down your experience. Don't stress about doing it right. Just write it down, the date, write down who was present and what you remember happened and how it made you feel. And that's enough, that's enough. And then share that. If it's in an employment situation, share that with your human resources department. If it's not in an employment situation, save it. If it's in a marriage, if it's in a dating relationship, if it's in your family of origin, save it, because there could be a legal action at some point that you don't envision or plan on now, where that documentation could be really helpful.
Ooh, maybe even like having your phone, like if there's a person that you talk to and they just say the worst things, record them. Just let the video just play from under the desk or whatever.
Yeah, you could also screenshot text messages, save emails, try to be sure to document conversations. So if there's a conversation that you had, email somebody back so that it's in writing. Obviously you want to be careful about all of that, but another thing to know is that sexual harassment includes a male in a position of power misusing his power over a person that the person in power has power over. So it could be a male, it could be a female, it could be a non-gender binary person. Somebody in a position of power over somebody else, if they misuse their power over you, that is sexual harassment. So it does not have to be about sex to be sexual harassment. It's about power. So when this person is in a position of power, they do not have to ask you to do sexual favors for them for it to be sexual harassment. There could be those things involved, but it doesn't have to include that. And that all qualifies actually as sexual harassment. So I can share some information about that, resources, but documentation doesn't have to be difficult. A series, if there are frequent things, keep it going. Maybe you want to make a spreadsheet with the date, the people involved, and what happened and how it made you feel.
Yeah. The last thing that I want to do is if you could just look directly at the camera and just speak to the person watching this that is just really struggling with speaking up, that is struggling, and it was in the same position that you were in, what would you say to her?
It's not your fault. And you are enough. You are good. And somehow, some way, it's all going to be okay. And your voice matters, your gut, those instincts within you that are rising up and saying, something isn't right here, listen to your gut. We were taught as Christians at some point that emotions were not helpful, that emotions were a lie. That was in that whole Campus Crusade for Spiritual Laws tract that were like, emotions are the caboose, and you can just leave the caboose behind, and they're derailing you. And that is not true. Your emotions are a really important piece of information letting you know when something is wrong. So listen to your gut, listen to your instincts, attune to them, listen to them, take time to breathe, and write down how you are feeling and what you are experiencing, with whom you're experiencing them, and when.
Yes. Oh,
Have courage.
100% agree, 1000% agree. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I know that this is going to touch somebody's heart and make somebody's life better. So thank you for your courage. And
Thank
I just
you.
want to give you a hug. That's how I end my conversations, is I give hugs. Oh,
Thank you. I appreciate a hug. I
hugging
receive
you, hugging you and everyone watching this. Thank you.
that. And I will join you with
And I will
a
put
hug.
all the links for people to thank you. And I will put all the links for people to reach you down below in the description as well. You can just let me know what you want me to share.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
So good.
Thank you so much for being here. I would love it if you would comment what the time is on the screen right now, and just let me know that you made it this far. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please look out for more of these conversations and for other wonderful conversations with people that are the kind of person I want to be: compassionate, educated, well-spoken, growing, learning, reaching. You know what I mean? I want to be better. I want to know more. I want to know how I can love better and make this world a better place. So, thank you so much for being here. Hugs!
I kind of understand their premise that, marriage is hard and you have to make a choice, some hard choices when, times get tough. But if you're never happy, there's a problem.
The fear, the specter of it, kind of all that weight that's put on virginity, which is completely meaningless.
Just for me personally, I can't not be honest. And so, and I'm not going to censor myself around people. That's stupid. And so, it's not stupid. It's just doesn't seem right.
I also believe that we make mistakes and we need accountability, and we need to agree to grow.